In school, we're often taught that William Shakespeare is the most famous poet of the Renaissance, if not the world. We learn that he wrote 39 plays, 154 sonnets, and 6 epic poems. Yet, one puzzling fact is often overlooked. No letters, messages, or manuscripts in Shakespeare's handwriting have ever been found. No personal correspondence, no original manuscripts, nothing. How is it possible that the man credited with such a vast body of work left behind no physical trace of his writing? Did he even exist at all? According to the book Who's Bigger by Stephen Skinner and Charles Ward, Shakespeare is ranked as the third most influential person in history, following Jesus and Napoleon and ahead of figures like Muhammad. His works have shaped language, culture, and art for centuries. Yet, the mysteries surrounding his life have led many to believe that someone else may have been the true author of his iconic works. Some theories go even further, suggesting that Shakespeare himself orchestrated this anonymity, intentionally covering up his identity or even faking his own death. But before we even get to these intriguing theories, let's first explore what we know about Shakespeare's life, or perhaps what someone wanted us to believe about him. William Shakespeare was born on April 23, 1564, in the small town of Stratford-upon-Avon, England. He grew up in a world full of both opportunities and challenges. His father, John, made gloves and was an important figure in the town, something like a mayor today. His mother, Mary Arden, came from a wealthy family, but life wasn't always easy. Sometimes the family had money, and sometimes they struggled. So, young William grew up in a modest home, not rich, but not too poor either. Even with these challenges, Stratford was a town full of culture and learning. Most historians believe that Shakespeare went to King's New School, the local grammar school, and according to them, he studied Latin, classic literature, and the art of persuasion there. He likely read works by great writers like Ovid, Virgil, and Seneca, stories that would later inspire his own plays and poems. But the real mystery today is that there are no official records proving that Shakespeare ever went to school at all. How could a man with little formal education have written something like this? There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Or even something like this: some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. Sounds like the words of a highly educated mind, right? If you're wondering how Shakespeare, with no university training, could have created some of the greatest works in English literature, trust me, you're not alone. As you'll see later, This very question became the central argument for those who believe someone else was actually behind his works. And aside from that, Shakespeare's life was fairly ordinary, at least if we believe the history books. At just 18, he married Anne Hathaway, a farmer's daughter from the nearby village of Shottery, who was 8 years older than him. The marriage happened quickly, likely because of Anne was already pregnant. Just 6 months later, their first daughter, Susanna, was born. 2 years after that, in 1585, they had twins, Hamnet and Judith. But Shakespeare's life wasn't without tragedy. In 1596, his only son, Hamnet, died at just 11 years old. The loss must have been devastating, and many believe it influenced his writing. And if you think about it, his plays often explore loss, death, and fatherhood. But here is where our story becomes more mysterious. After the birth of his twins, Shakespeare disappears from historical records for nearly 7 years. Historians call this period his lost years. So what was he doing? Well, some say he was a school teacher. Others think he helped in his father's glove-making business. Some even believed he traveled abroad and worked as a law clerk, which can explain why his plays show such detailed knowledge of the law. But some take the mystery even further, suggesting he may have been a soldier, a sailor, or even traveled to Italy. After all, his plays like The Merchant of Venice and Romeo and Juliet paint such vivid pictures of Italian life that it almost feels like he had been there himself. But don't forget that Shakespeare wasn't rich. He was far from it. In fact, after having children and struggling to provide for them, he was barely scraping by. So it's no surprise that for some, this idea seems completely impossible. The next time Shakespeare's name appears in the historical records is in 1592, when he is mentioned in a critique by playwright Robert Greene, who calls him an upstart crow. Greene's words reveal something interesting: resentment. Many university-educated playwrights at the time looked down on Shakespeare, a man with no formal education, yet rising fast in the theatre world. Here's what Greene wrote. "Yes, trust them not, for there is an upstart crow, beautified with our feathers, that with his tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide, supposes he is well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you, and being an absolute Johannes factotum, is in his own conceit the only shake scene in a country." But what did all of this really mean? First thing is first, it's clear that upstart crow wasn't a compliment. Greene was saying that Shakespeare had climbed the ranks too fast, stepping into the world of playwrights without the proper education. He even accused him of dressing himself in the work of others, calling him beautified with our feathers, implying that Shakespeare was imitating or even stealing ideas from university-educated writers like himself. But Greene didn't stop there. He also mocked Shakespeare with the phrase "tiger's heart wrapped in a player's hide," which was a parody of a line from Henry VI. If nothing, this at least proves one thing. By 1592, Shakespeare was already writing plays, and judging by the reactions he provoked, it's safe to say he was doing pretty well for himself, especially in the ruthless world of Elizabethan England. Speaking of Elizabethan England, the late 16th century was the golden age of English theatre. London was buzzing with playhouses like the Theatre, the Rose, and later the legendary Globe. These were the heart of entertainment, drawing in everyone from street vendors to nobles. And it was into this lively, unpredictable world that Shakespeare stepped. From the very beginning, it was clear that he was different. He had a way with words. He could make people laugh, cry, or sit in silence, completely amazed. What made Shakespeare different from other writers was his deep understanding of people. While other playwrights often created characters who were clearly good or bad, Shakespeare knew that human nature is far more complex. As he once wrote, "The web of our life is of a mingled yarn, good and ill together." In other words, our lives are woven with both good and bad threads. Shakespeare didn't shy away from tough questions. Just think of Hamlet's famous words, "To be or not to be? That is the question." This isn't just a well-known quote, it's a reflection of human struggle. Do we face life's hardships or do we try to escape them? In Othello, Shakespeare explores the power of jealousy. He warns us, "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on." Jealousy doesn't just harm its victims. It slowly destroys the one who feels it, just as it did to Othello. But not all of Shakespeare's characters are tragic. Take Rosalind from As You Like It. She faces challenges with sharp wit and humor. "I was too young that time to value her, but now I know her." Her story reminds us that intelligence and laughter can be powerful tools in a world full of obstacles. So, Shakespeare gave us real, complicated people, full of dreams, fears, and flaws. His characters and stories live on because they are about us, about emotions that never fade, no matter the time or place. Did you know that Shakespeare also introduced over 1,700 words and phrases into the English language, many of which we still use today, 400 years later? Ever told someone to break the ice? That's Shakespeare. Ever been on a wild goose chase? Also Shakespeare. Ever called someone a gossip or said something was fashionable? You guessed it, Shakespeare again. And while this alone is fascinating, soon you will see that Shakespeare left us much more than just new words and expressions. For now, let's talk more about Shakespeare's life. In 1593, something terrible happened in London. A deadly disease called the bubonic plague spread through the city. To stop it from spreading, the government closed all theatres. This was a big problem for actors and writers because they had no way to make money. Shakespeare could have struggled like everyone else, but instead, he found a new way to use his talent and he started writing poetry. At that time, artists needed rich and powerful people to support them. One of those people was Henry Wriothesley, the 3rd Earl of Southampton. Shakespeare dedicated 2 long poems to him, Venus and Adonis, and the Rape of Lucrece. This helped build a strong connection between the two. The poems were a huge success. People loved them so much that they were printed many times while Shakespeare was still alive, making it one of his most popular works. This helped build a strong connection between the two. All of this helped Shakespeare to become a well-known writer in England. His success brought him closer to important and powerful people, and he gained respect as a poet. So when theatres reopened in 1594, after the plague had passed, William Shakespeare was ready to rise even higher. Shakespeare joined the Lord Chamberlain's Men, one of the most important acting groups in England. They were supported by Henry Carey, the Lord Chamberlain, a powerful man who helped fund their work. This group wasn't just any theatre company. They performed in the theatre, one of the first playhouses ever built in London. It was here that Shakespeare truly found his place, working as both a playwright and an actor. One of the group's biggest stars was Richard Burbage, a talented actor who often played the lead roles in Shakespeare's plays. Since Shakespeare knew the actors so well, he could write characters specifically for them, making the performances even stronger. Their shows attracted all kinds of people, from everyday workers to wealthy nobles, even members of the royal court. During this time, Shakespeare wrote some of his earliest and funniest plays. These plays were light, funny, and full of energy, the perfect way for audiences to forget their daily worries and have fun. Even back then, Shakespeare understood what makes people laugh: smart dialogue, ridiculous misunderstandings, and love stories that, no matter how messy, always find a happy ending. In The Comedy of Errors, a story about twins separated at birth, everything turns into total chaos. The audience loved the confusion, watching as characters ran around, desperately trying to figure out what was going on. One of them even cries out, "Am I in earth, in heaven, or in hell? Sleeping or waking, mad or well advised?" Because when everyone thinks there's someone else, how could things not get completely out of control, right? People also love the sharp humor in The Taming of the Shrew. The main character, Katharina, was strong-willed and stubborn, refusing to let anyone tell her what to do. Her quick wit made the audience laugh, especially when she said, "If I be waspish, best beware my sting." Her fiery personality and the battle of the sexes kept people entertained, because even back then relationships between men and women were full of drama. And then there was A Midsummer Night's Dream, a play full of magic, fairies, and love mix-ups. The audience loved watching love potions cause absolute chaos. One of the funniest lines in the play says it all. "Lord, what fools these mortals be." So just like today, people knew that love makes us all act a little crazy, and they loved to laugh about it. Shakespeare's time with the Lord Chamberlain's Men changed everything. The group quickly became one of the most popular theatre companies in London, performing in front of huge crowds, and even for Queen Elizabeth I herself. By 1599, the company built the Globe Theatre on the south bank of the Thames River. This new playhouse became the heart of Shakespeare's work. Its open-air design and large stage made the audience feel like they were right in the middle of the action. Every show brought in thousands of excited spectators ready to laugh, cry, and cheer. As Shakespeare's plays became more popular, so did his success. He wasn't just a writer, he was also a shareholder in the Lord Chamberlain's Men and later in the Globe Theatre itself. This meant he earned money from ticket sales, unlike many other writers of his time. Thanks to this, he had something rare for an artist: financial security. He didn't have to worry about money, and he could focus completely on writing. With his career stable and successful, Shakespeare took on bigger ideas. His plays became deeper, more emotional, and more complex, leading to some of the greatest works in history. And when I say Shakespeare's work became deeper and more emotional, I'm pretty sure most of you immediately thought of Romeo and Juliet. Let's be honest, is there anyone who doesn't know the story of this tragic young love? With its beautiful poetry and powerful emotions, Romeo and Juliet quickly became one of Shakespeare's most famous plays, and it still moves audiences today. Of course, there are many more famous plays, from Hamlet to Macbeth to King Lear, but if we started listening them all, well, this video would last a lot longer. But what we're going to talk about is the big change that happened in 1603, a change that completely reshaped England and, of course, Shakespeare's world. That year, Queen Elizabeth I passed away after ruling for an incredible 45 years. She had led England through a golden age of culture, and Shakespeare had thrived under her reign. But now, a new king was taking over, James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. And the big question was, what would this mean for Shakespeare? Would he still have royal support, or was everything about to change? As it turned out, this wasn't bad news for Shakespeare. The new king, James I, loved theatre and became a huge supporter of the arts. He personally took over as the patron of Shakespeare's acting company. So in May 1603, the Lord Chamberlain's men got a brand new name, the King's Men. In London, theatres faced rough competition and constant uncertainty, but now Shakespeare's group had the king himself on their side. This meant more opportunities, more security, and more freedom to create bold, ambitious plays without worrying about money like so many other writers of the time. But being close to the king came with expectations. James wasn't just a casual fan of theatre, he was a scholar and writer himself, deeply interested in power, morality, and the supernatural. And Shakespeare was always aware of what his audience wanted, adjusted his plays to match the king's interests. Take Macbeth, for example. Shakespeare wrote this play just 3 years after James became king. If there's one thing we know by now, it's that Shakespeare never added things just by accident. While writing this, he knew exactly what he was doing. The play is packed with mysterious witches who predict Macbeth's rise to power and ghostly visions that haunt him. And guess what? King James was obsessed with witchcraft. He even wrote a book about it called Demonology in 1597. So, if we blindly accept this biography, William Shakespeare is undoubtedly a true genius of drama, a man who enriched the English language with countless words and phrases, mastered genres as diverse as comedy, tragedy, and history, tackled themes far ahead of his time, and introduced theatrical concepts such as the monologue and meta-theatre that are still used today. In that case, it's no wonder he's remembered as one of the most famous writers in history. Or is he? What most of us don't know is that theories questioning Shakespeare's authorship began as early as the 18th century. The first major wave of skepticism arose in 1850 when American writer William Bacon published an essay claiming that Shakespeare's plays were in fact the work of a group of highly educated individuals and intellectual elites of the time. And one of the primary arguments against Shakespeare's authorship lies in his lack of formal education. It's widely believed that Shakespeare attended a local grammar school in Stratford, where he would have learned Latin and rhetoric. But beyond this, there's no actual evidence that he pursued further studies or gained access to the kind of deep and specialized knowledge his works display. Consider the vast array of subjects Shakespeare's plays cover: law, religion, astrology, medicine, psychology, botany, politics, and the intricate customs of societies across the globe, particularly Italy, a country that serves as the setting for many of his most iconic dramas. How could a man with no university education and seemingly no opportunity to travel beyond England possess such an expansive understanding of these diverse and complex topics? There is another strange detail in this mystery. Shakespeare's will doesn't mention any books. That's odd, isn't it? I mean, a man who wrote so much should have owned plenty of books. But here's something even more surprising. He didn't even own a Bible. Back then, almost every household had one, from rich nobles to the poorest families. So how could the man credited with such profound literary works lack even the most basic literary possessions? And then there's the mysterious case of Shakespeare's signatures. Only 6 examples exist that are believed to be his, and they are so drastically different from one another that some scholars argue they couldn't possibly have been written by the same person. What's even more puzzling is the apparent lack of skill and fluency in these signatures. They are shaky, inconsistent, and suggest that if they were indeed written by Shakespeare, he may have been functionally illiterate. This raises an even larger question. If Shakespeare struggled to sign his own name, how could he have written some of the most eloquent and sophisticated works in literature history, including Hamlet and King Lear? Some theories go even further, questioning whether these signatures belong to Shakespeare at all. Could they have been forged or written by someone else entirely? And if Shakespeare didn't stand behind these signatures or his legendary works, then who did? Sir Francis Bacon, the first person many believe might have secretly written Shakespeare's plays, is Bacon himself. Yes, he was a genius of his time. Yes, he was a philosopher, essayist, scientist, and politician, known for his sharp intellect and groundbreaking ideas. He had a sharp mind and big ideas that changed the way people thought about the world. And if anyone had the knowledge to write about power, ambition, love, and betrayal, well, it was him. As time went on, more and more people began to see striking parallels between Bacon's writings and Shakespeare's plays, too many actually to ignore. And because of this, many began to believe that Sir Francis Bacon is the man behind Shakespeare's works. People who believe this theory are called Baconians, and they're convinced it's true, obviously. They argue that Francis Bacon, a powerful man in Elizabethan politics, couldn't afford to be known as a playwright. That's odd, isn't it? Back then, writing plays wasn't seen as a serious work. It wasn't even considered frivolous by some. If people found out he was writing them, it could have hurt his political career. So according to this theory, Bacon needed a cover. That's where Shakespeare comes in. They believe Bacon used Shakespeare's name as a mask to secretly publish his plays. And this isn't just wild speculation. There are strange coincidences, hidden ciphers, and striking philosophical parallels between Bacon's writings and the plays attributed to Shakespeare that have kept this theory alive for nearly 200 years. The idea that Francis Bacon might be the true author of Shakespeare's plays first gained attention in the mid-19th century. As we already mentioned, in 1856, an American scholar named Delia Bacon, no relation but what are the odds, caused a stir with her controversial book suggesting that Shakespeare's works were actually the product of, listen carefully, a secret group of intellectual elites, and Francis Bacon was among them. Around the same time, British writer William Henry Smith took the theory a step further, arguing that Bacon alone was the true mastermind. Both pointed to the belief that Bacon's philosophical vision and political ideas were masterfully woven into the plays, hidden in plain sight for those clever enough to find them. But that's not all. Supporters of this theory believe that Bacon left secret messages hidden inside Shakespeare's plays. They claim he wanted to leave clues for those smart enough to find them. One of the strangest clues comes from the play Love's Labour's Lost. In it, we find a very unusual and I must say a very long word. Oh my god, just look at that. It looks impossible to say, right? But Baconians believe it's more than just a strange word. They argue that if you arrange or rearrange the letters and translate it from Latin, this means these plays F. Bacon wrote. Coincidence? Maybe. But Baconians also point to similarities between Bacon's philosophical writings and the themes of Shakespeare's plays. Bacon's works often grappled with questions of power, morality, and human nature, which are the core elements of Shakespearean drama. For example, Bacon's essays on governance and the flaws of human ambition mirror the political intrigue of Macbeth and Julius Caesar. Although these two pieces of evidence may have felt more like conspiracy theories than solid proof, everything changed with the discovery of the Northumberland manuscript. Unearthed in the late 19th century, this bundle of documents contained several writings attributed to Francis Bacon, but that's not all. Among its pages were what appeared to be early drafts of Richard II and Richard III, plays long credited to Shakespeare. The real shock, however, was found on the manuscript's cover. Written over and over again were the names Bacon and Shakespeare, as if the two were undeniably connected. At this point, Baconians knew they had stumbled upon only the tip of the iceberg in this unfolding mystery. And just when it seemed the revelations couldn't get any more dramatic, they did. Inside the manuscript, they found something even more astonishing. The phrase, yup, the same tongue-twisting word found in Love's Labour's Lost, which some had already speculated meant these plays F. Bacon wrote. But this time it didn't appear alone. Beside it, they discovered the name Thomas Nash, a playwright and poet from Bacon's time. This new detail sent Baconians into a frenzy. They modified their theory, now believing that while Bacon had masterminded Shakespeare's works, he may have not worked alone. They argue that figures like Nash were part of a secret collaboration guided by Bacon's genius. Even skeptics, who had long dismissed the Baconian theory as baseless and pure coincidence, struggled to brush off these findings entirely. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Baconian theory reached its peak, fueled by growing obsession with hidden codes and secret messages. Many believed that Francis Bacon had embedded clues in Shakespeare's plays, not only to reveal himself as the true author, but also to expose shocking secrets about the Elizabethan court. One of the most passionate believers was Orville Ward Owen, who was convinced that Bacon's plays hid a story of betrayal and lost destiny. Owen took his belief to an entirely new level. He created a cipher wheel, a device he claimed could decode messages hidden in the plays. What he found was astounding. He declared that Bacon was the illegitimate son of Queen Elizabeth I and her favorite, Robert Dudley. According to Owen, Bacon was the rightful heir to the throne, but was denied his birthright. Heartbroken and unable to reveal the truth publicly, Bacon supposedly encoded his tragic story into Shakespeare's works. But Owen didn't stop there. In 1909, he became convinced that Bacon had hidden original manuscripts in a secret vault under the River Wye in England. Determined to find them, he began digging, spending years excavating the riverbed in search of proof, but unfortunately, he found nothing. At the same time, arguments against the Baconian theory began to surface. For one, no real evidence was ever found to support Owen's claims about hidden messages or secret vaults. Also, how could Bacon have written all of Shakespeare's plays while also managing a high-pressure political career? For many, it simply doesn't add up. However, the idea that Sir Francis Bacon might have been the true author of Shakespeare's plays was only the beginning. Over time, the search for the real Shakespeare introduced new suspects, and among the most intriguing was Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. But who was he? And why do so many think he might have been the true genius behind Shakespeare's timeless works? Edward de Vere, born in 1550, was no ordinary figure. As the 7th Earl of Oxford, he was a nobleman, deeply connected to the powerful world of Elizabethan court life. Orphaned at a young age, he became the ward of William Cecil, one of England's most influential statesmen. This gave Edward access to the heart of politics, culture, and art. He was also a poet, a playwright in his own right, sponsoring theatrical companies and helping to shape the era's creative landscape. But his life was far from perfect. Edward was known for his reckless spending, fiery temper, and personal scandals, which often overshadowed his accomplishments. He also traveled extensively through Europe, immersing himself in Italian culture and customs, a detail that Oxfordians, the people who came up with this theory, believe holds the key to the vivid settings and intricate details of some of the Shakespeare's plays. I mean, nearly half of Shakespeare's plays are set in Italy, and they capture the geography, customs, the laws of the country with striking accuracy. And if Edward traveled extensively through Italy in the 50s, 70s, as we've already mentioned, visiting cities like Venice, Padua, and Verona, then it's not hard to imagine that he could have been the one who wrote Romeo and Juliet, right? Edward's life itself also seems to mirror themes and events in Shakespeare's plays. For example, Edward was famously captured by pirates during his return from Europe, an experience that appears almost identically in Hamlet. His troubled marriage to Anne Cecile, the daughter of Lord Burghley, is thought to have influenced Shakespeare's complex portrayals of love, betrayal, and strained relationships. Edward de Vere died in 1604, 5 years before Shakespeare's sonnets were published. Oxfordians point to the sonnets' dedication, which refers to their author as an ever-living poet. They argue that this phrase implies the writer was already dead, aligning perfectly with Edward's timeline. Among the favorite pieces of evidence for Oxfordians is Edward de Vere's personal copy of Geneva Bible. In it, he had underlined and marked passages that seemed to catch his attention. And while this might not sound unusual, after all, many of us do the same. It's what came next that has fascinated supporters of this theory. Many of the sections Edward highlighted in his Bible match biblical references found in Shakespeare's plays. Specific themes, ideas, and even direct lines from scripture appear in works like Hamlet and King Lear. For Oxfordians, this is a strong clue that the diverse personal reading habits may have directly influenced the religious themes woven throughout Shakespeare's works. Taken together, these arguments are, for many, evidence that this is too compelling to dismiss or simply write off as coincidence. However, for others, it doesn't make much sense. One of the biggest challenges, they say, is the timeline of Shakespeare's works. Edward de Vere died in 1604, yet many of Shakespeare's greatest plays are believed to have been written years after his death. Oxfordians argue that these plays were either written earlier and published after that, or completed by other writers using de Vere's notes. But for many, this explanation feels like a stretch. There's also a big difference in the writing style. Edward's poetry is well written, but it's much simpler. It doesn't have the deep emotions and complex ideas that make Shakespeare's plays so powerful. Shakespeare's writing is full of rich language, clever wordplay, and a deep understanding of human nature. In contrast, Edward's work feels more plain and traditional, so it's hard to believe that the same person could have written both. Of course, the question of Shakespeare's identity might feel simpler if the contenders were limited to just Shakespeare himself, Sir Francis Bacon, and Edward de Vere. But the mystery only gets bigger when we realize that many other people have been suggested as the real Shakespeare. And to make things even more confusing, each theory seems to make sense in its own way. Who was Shakespeare, then? Let's take a look at the theory surrounding Christopher Marlowe, a famous playwright and poet from Shakespeare's time. Many say he was Shakespeare's biggest inspiration, but some believe he was actually Shakespeare himself. Marlowe was a brilliant writer. His plays like Dr. Faustus and Tamburlaine changed theatre forever. But in 1593, something shocking happened when he was at the height of his fame. He died. Or did he? The Marlowean theory is based on a strange coincidence. Just 13 days after Christopher Marlowe was reported dead in 1593, Venus and Adonis, the first work with Shakespeare's name on it, was published. Because of this, some people believe Marlowe faked his death and kept writing under the name Shakespeare. If you are wondering why anyone would go to such extremes, don't worry, because the people who believe this theory have a very clear explanation. According to them, Christopher Marlowe had a good reason to disappear. By 1593, he was in serious trouble. He was accused of heresy, which was a dangerous crime back then that could lead to execution. Some even say he was a secret spy for Queen Elizabeth I, recruited while he was a student at Cambridge. On May 30th, 1593, Christopher Marlowe was reportedly killed in a fight over a tavern bill in Deptford. But something about his death doesn't add up. The official records have many inconsistencies, and people who were there had links to Elizabethan spies. This has led some to believe that the whole thing was staged. Some think that Marlowe's powerful friends knew he was in danger and helped him fake his death. If that's true, he went into hiding, took on a new identity, and kept writing. But look at these two lines, one from Marlowe's The Jew of Malta and one from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. But stay, what star shines yonder in the east? Now Shakespeare. But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? At first glance, these lines feel very similar. Both use such similar words and sentences structure that many think this isn't just a coincidence, but proof that Marlowe and Shakespeare were actually the same person. What else might surprise you is that some people believe Shakespeare was actually a woman. One theory suggests that Emilia Lanier, a poet with Jewish Italian roots, may have written at least some of Shakespeare's plays. Born in 1569, Emilia was highly educated. John Hudson, a scholar who supports the Emilia theory, noticed something interesting. Her poetry and Shakespeare's plays have a similar style. Emilia also knew a lot about music, and Shakespeare's plays mention music more than any other writer of his time. But what really makes Emilia stand out is her bold personality. She spoke her mind at a time where women were expected to stay quiet. And in The Taming of the Shrew and Much Ado About Nothing, Shakespeare created strong female characters who didn't just follow society's rules. They were smart, witty, and ready to stand up for themselves. For example, in Much Ado About Nothing, Beatrice is one of Shakespeare's boldest women. She refuses to be quiet and even mocks men, saying, "I had rather hear my dog bark at a crow than a man swear he loves me." People loved Beatrice because she was independent and didn't wait for anyone to decide her future. She made her own choices. So it's not surprising that many believe Beatrice actually reflects Emilia's own struggles as a woman in a world where men had all the power. This theory, like so many others, raises more questions than answers. But as you might expect, Emilia Lanier isn't the only woman who has been suggested as the true author behind Shakespeare's works. Similarly, Marie Sidney has been proposed as another possible candidate. Like Emilia, Marie is believed by some to have written about herself in already mentioned plays, portraying a woman navigating a world dominated by male power. And believe it or not, over 160 people have been suggested as possible candidates for the true author of Shakespeare's works. What's even stranger is that many of these theories have been taken seriously, becoming subjects of study for scholars, cryptographers, and historians alike. But what if the answer is much simpler? What if after all the debates, all the clues, and all the speculation, the truth is that Shakespeare really was the man behind his own works? Yes, these theories might sound exciting, and the odds of such coincidences might seem incredibly small, but we can't ignore explanations that include Shakespeare himself as the true author. There are logical reasons to support this idea, especially when we consider that we are talking about someone who lived centuries ago. For example, Shakespeare's inconsistent handwriting and the varied spellings of his name are often used as arguments against his authorship. But let's be honest, that wasn't strange at all in the 16th century. Back then, there was no such thing as standardized spelling, not even for names. Some people say Shakespeare couldn't have written about things like law, medicine, or foreign places because he didn't have the right education, which really come from school or university. And even if he never traveled, many people in Elizabethan England did, and when they came home, they shared their stories. Shakespeare could have learned from their books, conversations, and experiences. Samuel Johnson, one of Shakespeare's greatest admirers, once said that Shakespeare's genius didn't come from academic training, but from his sharp understanding of human nature. Shakespeare's unparalleled ability to capture the universal truths of the human experience, many believe, wasn't the result of an aristocratic background or hidden identity. It came from his natural brilliance and insatiable curiosity. You can say whatever you want and support whichever theory you like, but for understanding people and life, you don't need formal schooling, do you? Yet, some aren't satisfied with the explanation that Shakespeare's curiosity and access to libraries were enough to create such complex works, nor do they fully agree with the idea that someone else wrote Shakespeare's plays. Instead, they've developed an entirely new theory. Yes, there are already many theories, but Shakespeare's life is so full of mystery that it's no surprise this won't be the last. Here we come to one of the most intriguing theories. Some believe Shakespeare was a member of the Rosicrucians, a mysterious group of thinkers and scientists from the early 16th. These people blended science, art, and hidden knowledge to unlock life's greatest mysteries. And here's where it gets interesting. The themes found in Shakespeare's works, deep human emotions, philosophy, and even hidden symbolism, seems to align perfectly with what the Rosicrucians believed. Could this explain his vast knowledge and understanding of the world? And also, the group's emphasis on secrecy could explain the gaps in Shakespeare's life, such as the so-called lost years, when there's little documentation for what he was doing. For Rosicrucians, keeping their activities and identities hidden was crucial, and this secrecy might explain why parts of Shakespeare's life remain a mystery. But despite its allure, the Rosicrucian theory faces serious challenges. There is no solid evidence linking Shakespeare directly to the society, nor any proof that he had personal ties to Rosicrucian members of their activities. While the similarities between his works and Rosicrucian's ideals are fascinating, they fall short of proving he was part of the group. In the end, the simplest explanation might be the most likely. Shakespeare was just an ordinary man with an extraordinary imagination and a boundless curiosity. This idea answers many questions about his life, except one. Why hasn't a single original manuscript of Shakespeare's works survived to this day? He wrote so much, yet not a single page of his handwriting remains. It's as if someone wanted to erase all traces of his existence, to make it seem like he never lived at all. But what if that someone was Shakespeare himself? Sure, many of you may think that the lack of preserved original manuscripts of Shakespeare's works is simply due to the high cost and scarcity of paper in his time, and you wouldn't be wrong. In the 16th and 17th centuries, paper was handmade from cloth, making it expensive and labor-intensive to produce. Recycling paper was a common practice, and it wasn't unusual for older documents to be repurposed into new ones. Manuscripts of plays were viewed as working documents, tools of the trade rather than artifacts of lasting importance. After the performance, these manuscripts were often discarded or recycled. Moreover, theatres of the time, including Shakespeare's Globe, had no formal archiving process. Scripts were written for immediate use, and once printed copies like the first folio became available, the originals were often deemed unnecessary and destroyed. All of this provides a logical explanation for why no original Shakespeare manuscripts have survived. But here's where the story gets more interesting. This is one of the greatest and most enduring mysteries surrounding Shakespeare, a question that has puzzled scholars and enthusiasts for centuries. This is a theory that remains alive to this day, revealing far more than we ever imagined about Shakespeare's life. What comes next will show you that Shakespeare was far more than just an actor and playwright from Stratford. It reveals a mind of extraordinary depth, filled with secrets, complexities, and enigmas that set him apart as one of the most fascinating figures in history, far greater and more profound than most could ever imagine. And all of it ties back to the mystery surrounding his death. William Shakespeare is said to have died on April 23, 1660, traditionally believed to be his 52nd birthday. Yet, there are no reliable records explaining how or why he died. Don't you think this lack of information is very strange? At a time when the deaths of important people were usually well recorded, the lack of any detailed account of Shakespeare, one of the greatest writers ever, is very unusual. About 50 years later, John Ward, the vicar of Stratford, wrote that Shakespeare had a merry meeting with poets Ben Jonson and Michael Drayton. According to him, Shakespeare drank too hard and then died of a fever. While not impossible, this anecdote is more folklore than fact. What's even stranger is how little attention his death received. For someone as famous as Shakespeare, you'd expect public mourning or big tributes, but instead his passing went almost unnoticed. Shakespeare's grave at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon adds yet another layer to the mystery. The grave is marked by an eerie epitaph, warning anyone who dares disturb his remains. Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear, to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. At first, this curse might seem like a simple way to deter grave robbers, but what if it was meant to hide something far more shocking, like the possibility that Shakespeare's body isn't in the grave at all? Some theorists believe this could be true, and it leads to an even bigger question. Did Shakespeare fake his own death? And if so, why would he do it? One idea is that he wanted to escape the pressures of fame, mounting debts, or even political trouble. Another suggests that he simply wanted to live the rest of his life in peace and anonymity. But there's even a stranger theory. Some believe that Shakespeare withdrew from public life to secretly work on one of the most influential books of all time, the King James Bible. The idea that William Shakespeare, the Bard of Avon, might have had a hand in crafting one of the most influential texts in history, the King James Bible, sounds like the ultimate literary conspiracy. And yet, as with many tales surrounding Shakespeare, there's enough intrigue and mystery to make you stop and wonder. One of the most tantalizing pieces of evidence lies in Psalm 46 of the King James Bible. If you count 46 words from the beginning of the psalm, you arrive at the word shake. Now count 46 words from the end and you land on the word spear. Put them on together and what you get is Shakespeare. Also, scholars have noted that the King James Bible was completed in 1611, the year Shakespeare turned 46. Some see this as a hidden clue, a clever way for a brilliant writer to leave his mark on the famous text. Proponents of the theory argue that some parts of King James Bible, especially the Psalms, carry signs of Shakespeare's poetic talent. The rhythm, vivid imagery, and carefully chosen words in these passages have a dramatic quality that feels similar to his plays and sonnets. While the translators followed strict rules to stay faithful to the original texts, the beauty of the language stands out. And who was better to bring this to life than the most celebrated writer of the day? By 1610, Shakespeare had mostly stepped away from the theatre and returned to his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. Interestingly, this was around the same time the final stages of the King James Bible translation were underway. The project, completed in 1611, was done under the patronage of King James I, the same king who supported Shakespeare's theatre company, the King's Men. Some suggest that Shakespeare's so-called retirement wasn't really a withdrawal at all. Instead, they believed he shifted his focus from the lively world of theatre to a quieter but equally significant task, helping to shape one of the most influential texts in history. But if Shakespeare really was involved in the creation of the King James Bible, why wouldn't he claim credit? The answer lies in the cultural and religious tensions of the time. Theatre was often viewed with suspicion by Christians, many of whom considered it immoral or frivolous. Publicly associating a playwright with the translation of God's word might have sparked outrage or even discredited the project. That's why Shakespeare may have opted for anonymity to avoid controversy, leaving behind only cryptic clues. And speaking of cryptic clues, We now come to an even wilder theory, one that suggests Shakespeare faked his death and hid his works to deliver a message meant for future generations, perhaps even us. According to this idea, he didn't want anyone from his own time to find his books. But before we even get to the messages Shakespeare might have hidden, let's focus on the evidence that he hid his writings and books in the first place. For centuries, Shakespeare's grave in Holy Trinity Church, Stratford-upon-Avon, has been shrouded in secrecy. In 2016, a team of scientists conducted a groundbreaking scan of Shakespeare's grave using ground-penetrating radar, and the results were shocking. The scan revealed signs of disturbance, suggesting that Shakespeare's grave may have been tampered with at some point in history. Even more unsettling, there was no sign of a coffin beneath the stone slab. Instead of a properly constructed burial chamber, the radar indicated a shallow, hastily dug grave, unlike what one would have expected for England's most celebrated writer. But the real shock came when researchers turned their attention to another part of the church, an area that had been off limits for centuries. Just a few feet away from Shakespeare's grave sits the church's most sacred and untouchable structure, the Holy of Holies, altar stone. This altar is sealed, heavily protected, and under constant surveillance. No one is allowed to approach it, let alone open it. And because of that, it has long been rumored that something is hidden inside. Another radar scan provided a clue that this might not just be a legend. The results confirmed the presence of an enormous hidden cavity within the altar, much larger than what should exist in a structure of its size. A cavity larger enough to hold something. A hidden collection of manuscripts, perhaps? If Shakespeare truly did hide his works, his lost sonnets, unknown plays, or even secret writings never meant to be found, this could be where they are waiting. For those who have long suspected that Shakespeare's embedded secret messages within his works, this discovery only fueled the fire. But there was one final clue, one that had been sitting in plain sight for over 400 years. Printed in 1609, the dedication to Shakespeare's sonnets has baffled scholars for centuries. Just look at this picture. Do you notice something strange? The words are broken apart by random dots. That's not how people normally wrote back then. It almost looks like a secret code. Now look at this name, Mr. W.H. Who is he? The truth is no one knows for sure. Some believe he was the young man Shakespeare dedicated his sonnets to, but others believe he is a clue, perhaps a reference to a location or even an alias of a person who hid Shakespeare's writings. And here's something even stranger. See the phrase ever-living poet? That might sound normal today, but back in the 17th century, people used ever-living to describe someone who was already dead. And when these sonnets were published in 1609, Shakespeare was still alive. So what does this all mean? Could the dedication be written after his real death? Or was Shakespeare already dead in some other way, perhaps hidden, in exile, or working under a different name on something else? And finally, we have these initials, T.T. Most people say this stands for Thomas Thorpe, the publisher of the sonnets. These could also be the true initials of the person who hid Shakespeare's works, or even a wilder theory, the person who transferred them from Shakespeare's grave to a secret location, like the Holy of Holies. In that case, the anomalies in the grave, the missing coffin, and the cryptic warning on his tombstone are just an elaborate misdirection designed to keep the truth hidden forever. Of course, this raises an important question. Why was there even a need to hide Shakespeare's sonnets in the first place? Well, many believe that Shakespeare's embedded crucial messages within them, codes meant not for his own time, but for future generations. But Shakespeare could not have embedded such complex messages alone. He would have needed the help of someone skilled in ciphers, numerology, and hidden knowledge, right? And that leads us to one of the most enigmatic men of the Elizabethan era, John Dee. If anyone knew how to hide messages, it was him. Dee was many things: an alchemist, mathematician, cryptographer, and even a spy. He was also deeply involved in the occult. He advised Queen Elizabeth I, went on secret missions, and believed that hidden knowledge could have been passed down through coded messages. His personal signature was 007. Yeah, the same number that later inspired James Bond. But that's not what matters here. What's important is that Dee was obsessed with geometry and numbers. Coincidentally, or maybe not, Shakespeare's sonnets are full of mathematical patterns. So did Shakespeare and Dee work together, embedding hidden messages for us, future generations, to discover? Or did Shakespeare learn all of these secrets and encode them himself? Either way, one thing is clear. Shakespeare was not just writing for his time, he was leaving a message for us. So let's consider the possibility that Shakespeare's sonnets were never meant to be read only as poetry, but as an encrypted message. It might sound unbelievable until you start looking at the numbers. So the number of Shakespeare's sonnets, 154, is not a coincidence. Some researchers have discovered links between the number 154 and Kabbalistic codes suggesting that the structure of the sonnets was part of a deliberate system of hidden wisdom. But wait, there's more. One of the most puzzling and unsettling poems in Shakespeare's collection is Sonnet 66. Unlike his other sonnets, which talk about love, beauty, and time, this one is full of frustration and disappointment. It feels less like a poem and more like a list of everything wrong with the world. Shakespeare writes about corrupt leaders, virtue being betrayed, and a society where good people struggle with the undeserving rise to power. So in his Sonnet 66, Shakespeare wrote, "Tired with all these, for restful death I cry, as to behold desert a beggar born, and needy nothing, trimmed in jollity and purest faith, unhappily forsworn." Some modern cryptographers think this is Shakespeare's way of explaining his own life, and they even suggest that it hints at the reasons he had to hide his sonnets. But certain cryptographers claim that Sonnet 66 contains hidden letters, numerical patterns, and encrypted phrases that suggest a deeper level of meaning, one connected to secret knowledge, surpassed wisdom, and even warnings about events yet to come. Maybe he was trying to warn future generations about knowledge too dangerous to say out loud. Alongside John Dee, he might have used poetry to hit forbidden truths, making sure they survived in a world where speaking too openly could mean persecution or even death. And if you think Shakespeare couldn't have warned us about anything centuries ahead of his time, then how do you explain this? He hid mathematical equations in his sonnets, equations that didn't even exist back then but are now studied in universities around the world. For example, when scientists and cryptographers analyzed Shakespeare's sonnets, they found something incredible. The way he arranged verses, numbers, and repeated words seemed to form hidden mathematical equations. These equations matched 12 fundamental scientific constants, including the speed of light, calculated 300 years before Einstein's theory of relativity. Fascinating. Also, by studying patterns in words like earth, moon, sun, and light, researchers were able to calculate the distance between the earth and the sun, as well as the earth and the moon, with 99.84% accuracy. This level of precision was far beyond what anyone knew in Shakespeare's time. But maybe this knowledge isn't so impossible, especially if we consider what John Dee believed. He claimed to have mastered the angelic language, a secret way of communicating with higher beings. Dee called this divine language Enochian, named after the biblical figure Enoch. According to Dee, angels themselves revealed hidden knowledge to him, including the secrets of civilization. So if Shakespeare's sonnets contain Enochian messages, decoding them could reveal cosmic laws, the same laws that ancient Egyptians and even older civilizations may have used to build pyramids and develop advanced knowledge long before modern science. And speaking of ancient Egyptians, one of the biggest mysteries surrounding the Great Pyramid is its inexplicable mathematical precision. It wasn't until the 19th century that scholars began realizing its dimensions encode fundamental mathematical constants such as pi and phi, the golden ratio, with remarkable accuracy. At first, these discoveries were dismissed as coincidences. After all, how could an ancient civilization, supposedly without advanced tools, have known about such precise mathematical relationships? And yet, the measurements continued to align too perfectly to be ignored. But the more shocking part is that the same mathematical constants embedded in the Great Pyramid also appear in the structure of Shakespeare's sonnets. When scholars and cryptographers began analyzing the numerical structure of the sonnets, they found unmistakable patterns matching the ratios of the Great Pyramid. The total number of Shakespeare's sonnets, 154, is deeply connected to the Egyptian numerology and the geometric proportions of the Great Pyramid. The arrangement of lines, words, and repeated phrases produces numerical values that align with pi and phi. Additionally, the number 154 can be divided into 14 and 11, 14 being a fundamental pyramidal proportion, and 11 a number associated with spiritual awakening and Egyptian magic. Furthermore, the missing capstone of the Great Pyramid has long been a mystery. Some believe it was never placed, while others argue it was removed intentionally to conceal hidden knowledge. In Egyptian symbolism, the capstone represented completion, divine connection, and enlightenment. Now, when we examine Shakespeare's sonnets, we find a similar missing piece. The structure of the sonnets form a pyramid-like arrangement, but the last two sonnets, 153 and 54, seem detached, almost if they represent an unplaced capstone. These final sonnets focus on fire and water, opposites in alchemy, symbolizing transformation and hidden knowledge. And even if you dismiss all this as mere coincidence, one of the most astonishing discoveries related to Shakespeare's sonnets is their apparent connection to the geographic coordinates of the Great Pyramid of Giza. In Shakespeare's time, longitude was one of the biggest mysteries in navigation. There was no precise way to measure how far east or west a location was, so no one could precisely map the Great Pyramid's location. It wasn't until the 18th century that accurate methods were developed, long after Shakespeare's lifetime. And yet, when researchers analyzed the numerical patterns in Shakespeare's sonnets, they found something almost unbelievable. Many believe that this isn't just a simple case of marking where the Great Pyramid is located. After all, today we all know its position. Instead, what Shakespeare and Dee may have been trying to do was direct us to something far more profound. By embedding these coordinates within the sonnets, they weren't just pointing to a geographical landmark, but to a place of hidden knowledge, a repository of wisdom that predates recorded history. The Great Pyramid has long been considered the cradle of advanced understanding, a structure built with mathematical and astronomical precision that even modern engineers struggle to explain. For some reason, Shakespeare and Dee wanted us to look there and recognize it not just as a monument but as a key to something greater. Were they trying to tell us that the answers to these mysteries they encoded in the sonnets are hidden in the pyramid itself? And if so, then is it more than a map? It's a guide to a place where knowledge, power, and the secrets of existence might still be waiting for those who know how to find them. After everything we have uncovered, one thing is certain. Shakespeare's sonnets hold far more hidden knowledge than we ever imagined. If we have already managed to decode geographical coordinates, mathematical constants, and alchemical symbolism, who knows what else might still be waiting to be discovered. Perhaps this is exactly why Shakespeare felt compelled to hide his sonnets, maybe even his own identity. If the knowledge embedded in his works was truly powerful, as it seems, then being exposed in his time would have been too dangerous. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the Inquisition and political authorities were relentlessly cracking down on anything that seemed heretical, mystical, or subversive. Any knowledge that challenged the Church's control over truth and history was considered a direct threat. Ideas that hinted ancient wisdom, cosmic laws, or secret sciences had to be hidden, encoded, and protected. That is precisely why Dee and Shakespeare wanted to ensure that their messages and their knowledge they possessed would be preserved for the right minds and at the right times. They understood that only those who had the ability to decode these messages would be able to grasp the significance of what was hidden within them. In the end, it no longer even matters whether Shakespeare truly existed as the man from Stratford or whether his works were written by another hand. It doesn't even matter if his true identity remains forever lost to time. Because Shakespeare understood something far more deeper. In his play, As You Like It, he said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." And he truly meant it. He lived his own performance and became the ultimate character in one of the greatest stories ever told. So let's not forget, we're all just players, and when the curtain falls, it won't be our names, our words, our identities that endure, only what we leave behind. And that is why, centuries later, Shakespeare remains on the stage, immortal. That is what makes him, and all those like him, a true mind of eternity. Thank you for watching until the end. Deeply appreciated, with deep gratitude. Until the next time.